The planet didn't look like it wanted to kill them. That was the first lie. From orbit, Terran 7 wore its greens and golds like a jewel pinned to the dark. Sweeping lowland forests, amber plateaus burning in double sunrise light, and rivers that caught the twin stars and threw them back in long silver lines. Commander Holt stood at the observation port for 6 minutes before he said anything. Then he just exhaled slow, the way a man exhales when he's looking at something that cost more than he's willing to pay. "Breathable Atmo," said Aurora, standing at the sensor console. Her voice had that quality it always had, precise, a fraction too flat, like a word read from a page rather than spoken from memory. Nitrogen-oxygen mixture, 0.92 similarity to Earth standard. Soil composition within survivable ranges. Surface temperature nominal. She paused. "I am detecting electromagnetic anomalies in the lower canopy strata. I am unable to classify them." "Classify them after we land," Holt said. That was the second lie. The kind you tell yourself. They dropped through cloud cover in the survey lander. All 7 of them, gear-webbed and quiet the way soldiers go quiet before boots hit ground. Not scared, exactly, just conserving. Mason sat across from Holt and worked the strap on his helmet buckle, tightening and loosening it like a man who couldn't keep his hands still. He was 26. Holt had been 26 once, a long time ago, on a planet that hadn't tried to eat him. Rondeau, the team's heavy weapons specialist, had his eyes closed, arms folded, chin on chest. Sleeping or praying, with Rondeau it was sometimes hard to tell. Sato worked a data slate. Boca had her first paint on, 3 vertical lines down each cheek, the marks her grandmother had given her grandmother, carried across 40 light years in muscle memory and pigment. Fen sat at the back and said nothing, which was what Fen did. Aurora stood at the lander window and watched the ground come up. They hit the LZ at 0840 local time. A clearing in the Amber Plateau grassland 2 kilometers from the edge of the primary forest zone. The lander's ramp dropped with a hydraulic hiss and the air came in. Warm, thick, carrying a smell that wasn't quite vegetation and wasn't quite rain. Something between the two, something with an edge to it that the instruments didn't have a category for. Holt stepped out first. He always stepped out first. He stood in the grass and turned in a slow circle and looked at the forest line and the sky, and the way the double light fell at a 40-degree angle across the plateau, laying twin shadows off every blade of grass. Beautiful, genuinely, honestly beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made you trust it. He'd learned not to trust beautiful things. "Spread out," he said. "Perimeter first, survey grid after. Nobody goes inside the tree line alone." Rondeau grinned behind his visor. "Copy that, boss man." They worked the perimeter for 2 hours and found nothing but grass and stones, and a species of flying creature no larger than a sparrow that scattered at their approach in silent wheeling clouds. Aurora took samples from the soil, the water trickling through a shallow stream at the clearing's eastern edge, the air itself. She worked methodically, crouching and rising, her movements precise and unhurried, and Holt watched her the way he always watched her, not suspiciously, not the way some commanders watched their androids like they were time bombs in tailored skin, but carefully, attentively. Aurora was the sharpest instrument he had, and he treated her accordingly. "Water sample returns non-potable," she said, straightening from the stream. "Mineral compound present in solution, not immediately lethal but corrosive to organic kidney tissue over approximately 48 hours of consumption." "So we brought our own," Mason said. "Yes," Aurora said. That was wise. Mason looked at her, trying to decide if she just complimented him or stated a fact. With Aurora, it was always hard to tell, and she never volunteered the answer. The electromagnetic anomalies came back on Aurora's scanner at 1100. She stopped walking mid-stride, the way she did when something registered that her processing architecture hadn't predicted. "Commander." Holt was at her side in 4 paces. He looked at her scanner. The readout showed pulse patterns, rhythmic, localized, emanating from a dense cluster of forest 200 meters inside the tree line to the north. "Geological," he said. "No, the pattern is too regular." She paused a fraction of a second, long enough for him to notice. "Intentional. Machinery? I don't know what it is," she said, and the honesty of it, unvarnished and direct, made the back of Holt's neck go cold. He pulled the team back to the lander and redistributed the load. Rondeau took the heavy rig, the double-barreled repurposed mining cannon they'd bolted railgun mounts onto 6 months ago, on a supply station over Proxima. Boca had the pulse rifles. Sato rigged the sensor drone and sent it north in a low arc. They watched the drone feed on the lander's tactical display. The drone reached the tree line and the feed went white, not black, white. Pure, flat, featureless white, as if the signal had been overwritten by something that didn't care about their sensor technology at all. "Tell me that's interference," Holt said. "I cannot tell you that," Aurora said. "The drone is still transmitting. Something is blocking the signal selectively." She looked at him. "Something is choosing what we see." Fen leaned in from the back of the group, speaking for the first time all morning, his voice low and unhurried. "Then we don't go north." Holt looked at the dead white screen. He looked at the tree line through the lander's forward port. Calm and unmoving in the afternoon light, casting those long double shadows across the grass. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the mission packet, folded and worn soft at the creases from 3 weeks of transit, and he read the part he already knew by heart. Primary Resource Evaluation, Colonization Viability Assessment, Full Geological and Biological Survey. He put the packet away. "We go north," he said. "Tight formation. Nobody fires without my word." They went north in a line, Aurora at point, because her optics were better, and her threat response time was 40 milliseconds, versus the human average of 200. The grass gave way to packed earth and the trees closed over them. Enormous things, pale-barked and branching high, filtering the double light into a green-gold dimness that felt almost cathedral in its hush. The electromagnetic anomalies intensified on Aurora's scanner. She raised a fist and the team stopped. "Movement," she said. "Multiple vectors. 12 meters, 10, 8. It came out of nothing." That was the only honest description Holt ever gave later. In the report he wrote with shaking hands in the lander at 3 in the morning, sitting with his back to the bulkhead and his sidearm on his knee. It came out of nothing. Visible one moment, not visible the moment before. Roughly bipedal, 2 meters taller crowd, the body lean and angular as a drawn knife, skin the texture and mottled gray-green of dead bark. The fin-like structures along its skull ridge, some sensory organ, he learned, capable of picking up bioelectric signals the way a shark read water, flared wide as it stepped into visible space, making a sound like a card shuffled fast like a fan blade at low RPM. Then 2 more materialized beside it. "Contact," Aurora said, and the word was all the alarm they got. Boca fired first, center mass on the lead creature, and the pulse round hit and the thing screamed, a sound that ran through the audio spectrum like a saw through bone, and it did not go down. It stepped sideways, fluid and fast, and the fin crests flared and it disappeared again, and all of them were gone, and for 3 seconds the forest was utterly silent. Holt grabbed Mason by the arm. "Fall back, now. Don't run." They walked backward through the trees, Rondo sweeping the heavy rig in a slow arc, Boca covering left, Holt covering right, Aurora at the center of the formation processing everything her sensors could reach. The silence held. The double light came through the canopy in shafts. Something rustled 30 meters to the east once and was quiet again. They made the clearing and then Holt let them run. Inside the lander with the ramp up and the hull sealed, they sat and breathed. Mason was shaking, Fen was not shaking. Rondo poured something from a flask into a battered tin cup and set it on the console in front of Holt without comment, and Holt picked it up and drank it and set it back down. "We have to transmit to the ship," Sato said. "Comms array is still reading that electromagnetic interference," Aurora said. "We are isolated." The silence after that was different from the forest silence. This one had weight to it. Holt stood up. He pulled his jacket straight. He'd been doing this long enough to know the difference between a bad situation and a fatal one. And the difference, mostly, was whether you let yourself believe in the second category. He had a rule, one of 3 rules he kept, the way some people kept photographs, that he did not write off situations. He did not call things hopeless out loud. Not because hope was a thing he believed in with particular fervor, but because words had weight and hopeless weighed heavy on people who were still trying to figure a way out. "Aurora," he said. "Talk to me about their biology." She laid it out methodically. The creatures, she designated them Type A in her field taxonomy, were biological, not mechanical. Their invisibility was a form of adaptive chromatophore response, light bending at the cellular level, far more sophisticated than anything Earth biology had produced, but biological, which meant it had constraints, energy constraints. The fin crest sensory organs were the key. At close range, they read bioelectric fields. The tiny electrical charge produced by living muscles, nerve impulses, heartbeats. They could locate prey in absolute darkness, through solid obstacles, without needing visual confirmation at all. "So our optics don't help," Rondo said. "Not against an invisible target, no," Aurora said. "What does help?" Holt said. She thought about it. Genuinely thought. He could tell, because she tilted her head 2 degrees to the left. A processing tell he'd cataloged without meaning to over 3 years of working together. Their invisibility requires active cellular energy expenditure. It cannot be maintained indefinitely. Under thermal scanning, the chromatophore reaction produces a distinctive heat signature. Infrared would defeat the camouflage entirely. We have one thermal scanner, Sato said. The survey unit. Yes, Aurora said. One. Holt looked at the battered survey unit clipped to Sato's pack. He looked at the lander door. He looked at Aurora. What's the range on the electromagnetic interference? Based on the source cluster's location and signal strength, I estimate it drops to navigable levels approximately 400 meters south of the tree line. That would place a usable comms window approximately 600 meters from our current position. 600 meters of open ground, Mason said. Yes. Mason rubbed the back of his neck. He laughed. Short, quiet. The laugh of a man who recognized the specific flavor of awful luck. Holt liked that about him. Kids who could still laugh at bad odds were kids who could still move. All right, Holt said. Here's what we do. The plan was not elegant. Plans made in landers with one thermal scanner and a crew of 7, 3 of whom had taken damage to their confidence in the last hour, rarely were. But it was solid in the way that simple things are solid. Aurora would carry the thermal scanner and call targets. Rondo's heavy rig would handle anything the pulse rifles couldn't. They would move south in a tight formation, Aurora backward-facing on the rear to watch the tree line, Holt on point. 600 meters, straight shot, open ground. The type of creatures were somewhere in the forest at their backs. One more thing, Holt said. He went to the lander's emergency locker and pulled out the manual beacon unit, squat and orange. The kind that broadcast on old-frequency analog bands that no sophisticated jamming array would bother filtering because nobody had used them since the previous century. He checked the battery, full. He clipped it to his belt. Back up, he said. Aurora looked at the beacon. Something moved in her expression. Not emotion, exactly, or not what a human face would call emotion, but something that read as recognition, as appreciation for a specific kind of thinking. Adaptive, she said. That's the idea, Holt said. They opened the ramp at 1600 hours, when the double light was long and orange, and the shadows stretched east in pairs. And they moved south across the plateau grass in the formation Holt had laid out. The grass was tall enough to brush their hips. The forest was 40 meters behind them when Aurora said quietly, "Contact, tree line north-northwest, 2 signals. They are outside the trees." "How far back?" Holt said, turning. 30 meters and closing. "Rondo, I got nothing," Rondo said, eye at his scope. "I got absolutely nothing." "Aurora's got something, trust Aurora," she called the bearing. Rondo swung the heavy rig 18 degrees right and fired a sustained burst at chest height along the vector. And the rounds hit something that screamed, and the scream dropped, and one shape became half visible as the chromatophore response failed in the damaged tissue, folding in and out of visibility like a bad television signal, and then was still. The second one came from the left. It came fast, low, out of the grass, not from the tree line at all, circled wide while the first one drew their fire. And this was not what Holt had expected, because he had not expected tactics, and the fact of it hit him like cold water. The understanding that these things had just played a deliberate, coordinated feint. It hit Boca and took her down. She hit the ground hard and the creature pinned her, visible now that it was committed. Its fin crests flared wide, and the hide rippling between its natural color and nothing. And Holt shot it twice in the crest ridge from 6 meters and it convulsed, and Boca drove her combat knife into its throat, and it dropped sideways and she lay under it gasping. Her left arm, cut from shoulder to elbow, face paint streaked with blood. She was alive. Holt pulled the creature off her himself. It weighed what a large man weighs. He got Boca to her feet, and Aurora was already there with the trauma kit, working the arm with the efficiency of a field medic and the composure of someone who does not feel the weight of blood. "Move," Holt said. "Don't stop." They moved. 400 meters from the tree line, Aurora reported the electromagnetic interference dropping. At 500, Sato got a fragmented carrier signal. At 580, Holt keyed his comms and heard static that had structure to it, and then, through the structure, the distant and miraculous voice of the ship's communications officer, tinny and broken, and absolutely, achingly real. "Survey team, please respond. We have been attempting." "This is Commander Holt," he said. "We are 600 meters south of the lander on LZ Plateau. We need extraction. Armed extraction. Bring everything we have on the ship." A pause. Static. Then, "Commander, we are showing hostile bio readings on your position." "I know," he said. "That's why I said armed." He clicked off and looked at his team. Boca was upright, arm wrapped, jaw set. Rondo had the heavy rig at his shoulder, scanning. Sato was watching the grass. Mason stood at Holt's shoulder and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. Fenn sat down in the grass and put his rifle across his knees and looked at the sky, patient as stone. Aurora stood at the southern edge of the group, scanner raised, and she said, "They are regrouping. I count 6 signals now." 6, Mason said. "Yes," he exhaled. He looked at Holt the way recruits look at commanders, when they need to borrow some certainty they haven't built yet for themselves. Holt looked back at him, steady, level, not performing, not pretending, and said, "Extraction is 20 minutes out. We're in the open. We have thermal on our side and the heavy rig and 6 pairs of eyes. This is winnable." It was winnable. He believed that. The belief was not a feeling so much as a decision, made with the same deliberate intention that a man picks up a tool because the work in front of him requires it. Mason nodded. He tightened the strap on his helmet. The Type A creatures hit them 3 times in the next 20 minutes. The first attack came from the south, unexpected, which meant they had individuals posted ahead of the main group. Another piece of tactical intelligence that Holt filed in the back of his mind with cold, clinical interest. Rondo dropped 2 of them on Aurora's targeting before they broke cover. The second came from the east, a flanking push, 3 animals moving in loose echelon. And this time Holt was ready for the feint and pulled Sato away from where the real push would come and was right, and they lost no one. The third was a single creature that came out of the ground, buried under a thin layer of soil and grass, invisible and patient, apparently capable of suppressing its bioelectric signature enough to drop below Aurora's scanner threshold when it chose to be still. And it took Mason and Holt both to drive it back. Mason firing point-blank into the fin crest array until the sensory organs ruptured, and the animal's coordination collapsed. When it was over and the creature was down, Mason sat next to it in the grass and put his hands on his knees and breathed. The blood on his arms was not all the creature's. Holt stood over him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and Mason didn't need words. He needed 30 seconds, and Holt gave them to him. "Up," Holt said at 31 seconds. Mason got up. The extraction shuttle came in low from the south, running lights off, dropping fast, and Holt had never loved the sound of shuttle engines as much as he did in that moment. The deep, mechanical, unglamorous thrum of human engineering cutting through alien air. It touched down 200 meters south of their position, and the door came open before the gear fully compressed. And the ship's chief of security came out at a run with 6 armed crew behind her. They swept north in covering formation while Holt's team moved south, and they met in the middle, and the chief of security looked at Boca's arm, and Holt's face, and Mason's hands, and said, "You look terrible." "We look alive," Holt said. They filed into the shuttle. Last in was Aurora. She stood at the door a moment before boarding, stood and looked north toward the tree line, 2 kilometers away in the golden evening light, and Holt watched her do it, and thought about what she might be processing. She had her data. She had her samples and her scan records and her field taxonomy. She had enough information to write a report that would inform every future expedition to Karen 7, assuming there were future expeditions, assuming anyone listened to the report. She turned and stepped aboard. The door sealed, the engines rose. The shuttle lifted, and through the port Holt watched the amber plateau fall away below them. The landing zone, the clearing, the scar in the grass where the lander still sat, the forest, the distant glint of rivers catching the double-star light. Beautiful. Still beautiful. In the shuttle, Rondo produced the flask again and passed it to Boca without a word, and she drank and passed it to Sato. And Sato passed it to Mason, and Mason passed it to Holt. Holt held it a moment. The flask was old brass, engraved on one side with something too worn to read. He tilted his head and squinted at it in the shuttle's low light. A name. Somebody's name. Not Rondo's. He looked at Rondo, who was looking out the port. Holt drank and passed it back. There was paperwork, of course. There was always paperwork. In the 2 hours between landing and the formal debrief, Holt sat at the small desk in his quarters aboard the survey vessel and wrote the incident report in the methodical, measured language that command required. He described the Type A organisms factually, their concealment biology, their bioelectric sensory apparatus, their demonstrated tactical coordination. He noted the electromagnetic interference, the water toxicity, the soil composition. He recommended against colonization pending further study and significantly enhanced contact protocols. He did not write about the moment the creature had used a decoy. He did not write about the specific quality of stillness that fell over his team after Boca went down. Not panic, not paralysis. Just the compressed, ferocious stillness of people who were deciding, in real time, that they were going to keep going. He did not write about Mason tightening that strap on his helmet. Over and over, nervous and ready, and both at once. He did not write about Aurora standing at the shuttle door looking north. Those things didn't fit in the report. They fit somewhere else. He finished the report and sat for a moment in the quiet of the ship, listening to the hum of its systems. The recycled air, the reactor's low pulse, the distant voices of crew in the corridor. And he thought about Kerosene 7 turning below them, golden and deadly and extraordinary, and about the creatures in its forest who had looked at a team of humans and humans adjacent and made a tactical calculation. The calculation had been wrong. Not because the creatures were stupid, they weren't, and he wouldn't pretend otherwise, but because the calculation had left something out. Something that didn't show up on bioelectric scanners. Something that wasn't measurable in the way that heartbeats and nerve impulses were measurable. He didn't have a word for it that didn't sound like a speech, and he wasn't in the mood for speeches. He put on his jacket and went to find his team. They were in the mess, most of them. Boca had her arm in a proper field splint now. The medic's neat white wrap already smudged from where she'd been handling her weapon. She was eating with her right hand and looking at Rondeau's data slate, pointing at something on the screen with a fork. Sato was writing up his own sector report at the end of the table. Fen was asleep in his chair with the particular comfort of a man who has decided that being awake is optional. Mason was at the coffee dispenser, which was producing something that called itself coffee, with the same conviction that Karen 7's atmosphere had called itself breathable. He looked up when Holt came in. "You're supposed to be debriefing," Mason said. "Already filed," Holt said.
"Commander wrote it in 2 hours. It's a short report."
Mason handed him the mug without being asked. Holt accepted it and stood next to him at the dispenser and drank. It was bad coffee. It was extraordinary. "We going back?" Mason asked. "To the planet." Holt thought about it honestly. He thought about the forest and the creatures and the faint and Boca going down, and the 31 seconds he'd given Mason in the grass, and the way Aurora had stood at the shuttle door looking north. He thought about the rivers catching the double-star light. "Not us," he said. "Someone will eventually, with better equipment, better intel." He paused. "They'll use our report." "Our report," Mason repeated. "Our report." Mason turned that over for a moment, turning his own mug in his hands the way he'd turned that helmet strap, the same restless, honest motion. Then he nodded once, and the nod said what it needed to say without either of them having to perform it. Aurora appeared in the mess doorway. She looked at Holt. She held up her data slate. "I have completed the biological specimen analysis," she said. "The findings are significant. The Type A organisms possess a level of group intelligence that exceeds any previously cataloged non-sapient species by a measurable margin. Their tactical behavior pattern today suggests social learning, distributed decision-making, and deliberate use of deception." She paused. "They are not sapient by current classification standards, but they are extraordinary." "Put it in the report," Holt said. "I intend to," she said. Then she looked at Holt with that quality she had sometimes. Not an expression he could fully name, but something in the angle of her attention that read as close to wonder as anything in her behavioral range. "Commander, for the record, I believe survived today because of a combination of tactical adaptation, equipment, and something I am unable to quantify." "Something you can't quantify," Holt said. Yes. What does it look like?" She considered him for a moment. "It looks like Mason picking up his rifle." Nobody in the mess said anything for a second. Rondo looked up from his slate. Boca set her fork down. Sato stopped typing. Fen improbably opened one eye. Then Mason laughed, short, genuine, a little rough, and shook his head. And the mess came back to life around them. Holt finished the bad coffee. He set the mug down. He looked at his team, worn, patched, already arguing about Rondeau's read of the creature's fin crest density in the thermal scan. Boca, insisting he'd overcounted. Rondeau insisting she could count better after she'd been mauled. Sato fact-checking both of them with the patience of a man who'd signed up for exactly this. And he thought about the distance between a world that was trying to kill them and a ship full of people arguing about data they'd survived to collect. It was not a small distance. He appreciated it. Outside the ship's ports, Karen 7 turned, patient and unaware, its forests full of extraordinary creatures who had miscalculated. Above it, in a survey vessel that smelled like old coffee and recycled air, and the particular brand of tired that only comes after surviving something, 7 people began writing the record of what had happened to them. Formal flank language of science and incident reports, and underneath it, in the spaces between data points, the untranslatable thing. We were here, we were afraid, we got up, we made it back. Aurora filed her biological analysis at 2200. It was by any measure the most comprehensive field study of an extraterrestrial predator species on record. She cross-referenced it with geological survey data, atmospheric chemistry, electromagnetic mapping, and soil toxicology. It was thorough and precise and meticulous. At 2201, she added one line to the appendix that wasn't in her standard field taxonomy format, and that Holt only noticed 3 weeks later when he read the full report. Subject organisms demonstrated superior individual and collective capabilities in all measurable parameters. Nevertheless, the survey team returned. This appears to be a recurring pattern. She had not been wrong about a single thing all day. She was not wrong about this either. The lights of the ship hummed on through the dark, above a golden world that had not finished with them yet, and in the mess, Rondo refilled the tin cup and set it at the center of the table. And nobody said who it was for, and everyone drank from it anyway.